now introduce Meagan Keane, who is Director of Product Marketing for Adobe Pro Video.
My name is Meagan Keane. I am Director of Product Marketing for Pro Video. What that means is I actually lead sort of the business strategy behind our video products. However, in my past life, I spent 10 years as a documentary filmmaker, editor, field producer. So I am very excited to have these two conversations with some of the doc creatives from this year's festival. So to start off, I would like to ask you to help me in welcoming the editors from Time and Water, Jocelyn Chaput, Erin Casper, and Mark Harrison. Welcome, all three of you.
Hello.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Huge accomplishment. I think best to start off, if you guys could collectively explain a little about Time and Water. What is this documentary covering?
Sounds great. Time and Water is about an Icelandic writer who is our narrator, who is confronting loss of glaciers and loss of his grandparents' generation. And in the face of that loss, he decides to put together a kind of time capsule and in an attempt to preserve what he has now and reach the distant future.
Great job.
It really is a beautiful documentary. I was honored to be able to get to see a screener of the film in preparation for this. The way I would explain it is sort of almost watching a live painting combined with a home movie, but truly in this very much traditional documentary format. How did each of you get involved in this project? It's very unusual to see 3 editors on a project. So tell me a little bit about how each of you became involved.
Sure. So I worked with Sarah, Dosa, and Erin on our last project together. So when Sarah was ready to commence a new project, I was already on the radar.
Absolutely. I've been working with Sarah since 2013. This is our 4th feature together, and Jocelyn and I worked together on Fire of Love. And Mark and I have known each other for many years through the Sundance Labs. And I think you're the only person I've run into multiple times in many cities. It's very serendipitous. So
just out of nowhere.
Exactly. So Sarah, with her collaborators, she has early conversations with, very early in her process. And so when she first started thinking about this film, it was, I want to say, in the summer of 2023. And it's been, a long collaborative process since.
I'm the last member to the team, but I ran into Sarah at a bar at a 40th birthday party, and basically she was explaining where everybody was at, and she wanted to just, see if I was available to watch a rough cut, and basically at that point, these people were so amazing in opening up their creative process and recognizing the opportunity to have me come on board. So I'm so thankful to join them as well, because I'm a big fan of their work.
Erin, you mentioned those early conversations. I can only imagine that there was a lot of talking that needed to be done to figure out and really align on what the vision was. The tone and the pacing of this film are so much really what make it the film that it is. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what those discussions were as you were jumping into a lot of archives, a lot of different types of footage, these sort of home documenting, home videos, but also these beautiful, nature videography, photography. And how did you come to this alignment of the vision for the film?
It starts really early. Sarah does a fair amount of writing, I think, on her own to begin with. But then something that we've developed over time at the outset of every film when the edit is about to begin, is that we'll watch the footage, and I think in this case with Time and Water, I think we were kind of because Andre shot his family for over 20 years, and then we're also contending with his father's archive, and then his grandfather's archive, and then I don't know.
And Sarah was commencing production and was
Yeah.
coming
Plus-
to us with
yeah.
remarkable glacier footage, and it was
Plus a lot of written material.
Written
Andre's writing. So we spent some time going through those things. We really liked, as editors, we really like to research, because especially on archival films. And then at the outset of every edit, we've watched stuff, and then we convene for an editing retreat, where actually we don't do any editing whatsoever. It's a time to really talk about the big questions and dream big. And so it's like a roving conversation. It's the start of a long conversation and dialogue. And I love what you're saying earlier about how editing is such a small % of it. It's so much at the heart of editing is the conversation. And so out of that retreat begins almost like a long document of our primary questions that we tend to that we are dealing with and wrestling with throughout the process, and then also our hopes and dreams for the film, and tone and pacing and everything.
And then that actually, in practice, looks like a giant table with all kinds of cue cards and books piled on it. And Sarah's always bringing in ideas from all kinds of fields, geology, anthropology. So it's a very tactile kind of process. No computers. Almost no computers at first.
A lot of standing and
a lot
walking.
Of standing.
We go for walks.
Yeah, we go for walks. We pace.
Snacks.
We snack.
Snacks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I feel like every edit bay is like there is a thing about the snacks that really kind of pull it all together.
Snacks are the fuel, and also the Icelandic word for snack is snart. So we had a lot of snart-o'clocks, things like that.
So what were some of the big questions? I mean, you said that, and I just was immediately like, oh, what were they?
I mean, I suppose, how do you tell a story that is ultimately going to be a 90-minute film, give or take, but that is trying to span not just multiple human generations, but where we're also trying to connect to a deeper kind of time. So I think a lot of the questions are just, what is time? How do we touch it? Can we touch it? And how do we kind of observe it in the world around us? And I'm getting very lofty, but those are some of the questions that we orbit around in the process of telling ultimately a very human story, a story full of love and relationships and connection. What were some
Absolutely.
other
I mean,
questions?
and how do you use the right word? Because it's like, how do you take these ideas and like really pull them down into the heart and tell the story from an emotional place always?
Yeah.
That, I feel when I entered the process, that was a huge question in terms of just like, there are many wonderful climate films, and how do you create a new story within this, subject matter that does lead with emotions and asks people to connect to it in a very personal way, because sometimes big problems can have such, I don't know, like a feeling of uncertainty or lack of motivation, or how to engage with it is a huge question.
Well, you all were very successful in creating a film that at once felt very specific to Iceland, to these topics of, the people of Iceland, and yet at the same time so human, and, concepts of family and generations and connection to place. And I'd love to understand how, between the three of you, you sort of divided the work, and how you all, to the topic of these fireside chats, how you all collaborated with each other.
Yeah, and I should say also, Sarah Dosa, our director, was very much embedded in the edit with us.
Of course.
And so it's very much the four of us plus our wonderful producers. It's very, very, very collaborative all around. I loved what a previous panelist said about ego, and really like kind of checking that at the door, because it's just so much more fruitful to just be focusing on what the film needs to be, and it kind of takes you out of it a little bit. So as far as working together, we just kind of look towards what needs to happen with this film, and how do we kind of tackle this collectively. Yeah, in like very specific, concrete ways, it means, okay, we've got X number of scenes or, these sequences, and we just divide this into different parts of the film, and we'll, take turns working on different scenes and exchange scenes and move things around. And shout out to Adobe Productions for making that infinitely easier than it used to be.
Yeah. I always feel, too, that it kind of falls, the division of labor, if you could really call it that, it kind of falls organically, too. Like Joss and I sort of talk about how, we're the same but different, And so when we are, and a lot of our work, especially on archival films, starts on paper, and then we're kind of writing it together. Sarah usually takes the first pass, and then we're, doing rounds, and then we're looking through the footage, and then we're adding to it, and, writing to the image. And then I think oftentimes there's a scene where I'm like, I don't want to edit that. And then
and I'm like, I want to edit that.
And then I'm like, yeah, and I know you're going to kill it. And same with Mark too. I felt like, Mark, would often want to tackle things, and I'm like, I know he's going to kill it,
Things just fall into place that way. We've been lucky.
It is remarkable, though, because across a lot of different experiences, as much as you try to do all of the things that we're talking about and check your ego at the door, to intentionally create space for intentional collaboration, especially up to the very last minute, which is a huge thing that we experienced on this film. When your team is spread in certain times in the process, in Iceland, in New York, in San Francisco, LA, you have to intentionally do that. And I've always been super impressed about that space that is created. And it usually takes time, it usually takes energy, it usually takes deep listening. And I think what people have been speaking about before us, it's not just setting your ego aside, it's actually letting the film kind of find its voice together, because it's not necessarily with big questions like this. It's what are we all trying to say? I think that's more powerful than what any one of us has to say. Yeah. And
so much credit of that tone setting goes to Sarah Dosa too. She leads with that, where she's not this is my way or this is your way. We really talk a lot about the third way. And just how much surprise and serendipity can come out of those unexpected discussions and collaborations.
Yeah, so Mark, you bring up the fact that you at times were very dispersed geographically. How did you guys establish your workflow from the outset? Did you know that you would be working remotely throughout the process? And how did you think through how you set up how you were working?
We did know we would be working remotely. I'm based in New York, you're based in LA, you're based in the Bay. But it's not a Sarah Dosa movie until you move in with each other. So we knew that it would be a process of coming together and going apart for sure.
Yes, yeah. So we did work in person a number of different sessions, usually around critical milestones, getting to our first rough cut, getting to our first fine cut. I don't want to call it a pressure cooker, but there is something that happens when you're in person where everything's just percolating more efficiently in some stages of the process. So when we weren't in person, we were all remotely at our stations with productions, all in the same project, chatting over usually Slack or calls. So it's still we feel each other in the room even when we're remote.
And was the choice to use Premiere a choice, or is that what you generally cut on, or how did you guys establish what you chose to edit with?
I think it was a choice, right? Yeah. Yes, we chose we chose Premiere. Just especially with productions, I think it's really that enabling us to do large, complex projects the way we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do before. The way that you can splinter a production into sub-projects. Just the whole thing is far more stable than, if we had tried to edit a project of this scale with decades of material in different formats. If we had tried to do that in a single Premiere project. I think it just would have been a little more challenging technically to keep that going. And I think because we had so many different formats, it's, we considered Avid, but I think it's trickier to convert all the different frame rates, all the different, like we had iPhone footage. I've never brought iPhone footage into Avid. I'm sure it's possible, but we just knew we were more familiar with sort of the compatibility of Premiere.
I did love the acknowledgement and almost acceptance of the different archival pieces and sort of the degradation of them and the calling out of that texture that archival added to the film. Was that a choice to like, you felt like, okay, this is sort of falling apart in places, we need to call that out? Or was that something that sort of organically came out in the edit?
Organically, we've always, I think since, at least since Fire of Love and probably before, I think Sarah's always been interested in archive and time and what time does to matter. And so that's kind of, I think, an interest we all share and something that was maybe not consciously on our radars at first, but that surfaced pretty early on.
It's interesting because it makes me think of another theme of the film is really about change, adapting to change, grappling with change, realizing that things may be changing beyond ever going back. And I'd love to hear just sort of some of the conversations around change that you all had in the development of this film.
When I think of change, I also think about our conversations about the future. And I think that that was a big conversation because, especially around themes of climate change, and you can have a sense of inevitability or that the future is fixed. But we talked a lot about how the future is not foreclosed and that, it's not foreclosed and thus changeable.
Yeah, you described it beautifully because at first, for me, thinking about glaciers and what I was learning in the process of this film and researching the data, it's disconcerting what we know, and yet there's also still a window, and not to sound over optimistic, but I'm not a pessimist, and so I think that like with change, it is still that question of how do we stay realistic while also, acknowledging that our actions today, every day, still ripple, despite what we know.
And as you say that, I can't help but think of a lot of the conversations we're having within the film industry right now as well. The change that's happening and the evolution of how stories are being told, or the evolution of technology. What are you thinking about in terms of the change and the evolution of filmmaking right now?
I mean, to play the optimist card right now, it's incredible to be surrounded by people who both love film and celebrate it and congregate together in celebration of it. And I think that it's from a lot of those moments, like in a time when it feels like a lot of those channels are like in isolated areas and happen over digital communication instead of in real life. Those places are where it's really special to be together and to experience the effects and have conversation together and talk about the tools that we use, that help us all do what we love to do. But I don't know. I think that looking forward, like that's where the real finger on the pulse comes from, is from that. I get so much energy from either watching other amazing art or actually just like in conversation about how I felt about other art that helps us kind of understand like what is uncharted territory and what is the work that still needs to be done in documentary. So, but the other part of that is that like when you focus on new tools and our ability to tell stories that were never able to be told before, like there are so many, it's that reality continues to give, so that's just like a, I don't know, general documentary love.
I have so many mixed feelings, and I'm optimistic about the talent out there and the filmmakers, both young and old, and I don't think that river of originality is any close to running dry ever. I don't think. What concerns me, of course, is the ever-evolving landscape of funding and just making sure that independence in storytelling is maintained, and that we are not sort of preemptively filtering ourselves as creators while having to pay bills. So that's been on my mind more and more.
Really is sparking a lot of the conversations that we're having here this week. I think as much as the industry is shifting and changing, the more that we're actually talking about it and letting our perspectives be known and communing about the importance of these stories to be told, the more we can, get through it and really come out better on the other side. We are running out of time, so I think that that's really actually a wonderful place to stop. I hope that this actually sparks a lot more conversations within these walls and throughout the festival. I want to thank all three of you for being here so much. Go see Time and Water. It's a beautiful film. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.